Hi everybody. So we're moving on to sustainable energy. So last week we spent a good amount of time talking about all the different sources of conventional energy that we mostly rely on currently. And now we're going to talk about the different technologies that we've developed already, how they can be implemented, and what the future might look like. So this is chapter 20 in your book. So when we're talking about how do we move towards more renewable energy and how do we get away from conventionals that have all these negatives like climate change and air pollution and all the negative impacts of mining coal and oil and things like that. One of the first things we need to talk about actually is energy conservation. And this is the fastest way to reduce energy impacts is basically to use less. So we could lower the amount of greenhouse gases being emitted and lower air pollution and the negative impacts of mining if we just use less energy. So some of this has to do with behavior, so turning off lights that you're not using or adjusting thermostats so that we're not keeping it 60 something degrees in the summer where the air conditioning has to work really hard to get that temperature down that much. Also, things like using fans can reduce how much air conditioning you actually need to use in the first place because you'll feel cooler because the air is moving better. And just by recirculating air can equilibrate because, sometimes in your house you have some rooms that are really warm and some rooms that are really cold, just the way the air is flowing. And so fans can help deal with that too. It's not all behavior. Some of it is technology. So moving away from the traditional types of light bulbs, the incandescent bulbs, to LED lights can save a ton of energy. And things like Energy Star appliances are also pretty important. So in Germany, they've actually reduced their dependence on fossil fuels a lot and reduced their greenhouse gas emissions. And a huge part of what they've done is energy efficiency. So you can see this is just a graph looking at percent change. And they have reduced the amount of energy they're using by becoming more efficient dramatically. So you can see there's 60% increase in efficiency in Germany. In general, their total power generation since 1990 has still gone up a bit, but their primary energy consumption has gone down. And a lot of this has to do with this massive increase in energy efficiency. Another thing has to do with our buildings in general. So not technology like appliances, but things like how much insulation do we have? Do we have good windows that hold in cool air or hot air depending on what season we're in? So this is a thermal image of a house, and this is taken in winter. So this is a time where they're trying to heat the house, and you can see the hotter colors basically mean a hotter temperature. And so you can see where this house is losing lots of heat. At the tops of the windows, you can see it's bright red. Some of these awnings, the very top of the roof, these are all places where this house is losing massive amounts of heat. So it's basically the homeowners are paying to heat their house, but not all of that heat is staying in the house. And so by better insulating some of these areas and making sure windows are sealed properly and things like that, we can actually save a lot just on our individual homes, but on a global scale as well. If we fixed a lot of these problems worldwide, we could save a lot of energy and not have to figure out how to get more energy from renewables. So one other way to deal with this is green buildings. So in Europe, high efficiency buildings are much more normal. We do have some in the United States, but there aren't nearly as many of them. In Europe, they have something called passive house standards. These are targets for extremely low energy use through thoughtful design and construction. They use about 10% of the energy of conventional buildings. So that's a massive decrease. That means they're using 10 times less. So that's amazing. And in many regions in Germany, these types of buildings are actually required. And this is what they focus on for these passive energy standards. So they have windows that seal really well, really good thermal insulation, and these are designed so that the home is not losing as much heat or cool air during the summer. They have these adequate ventilation strategies that circulate air in a way that is very efficient um, and reduces loss of that heated or cooled air. In the United States, we have a different program sponsored by the U.S. Green Buildings Council, which is what this USGBC is. And it's called LEED, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. And there are different standards, and I'll go through how they earn points. But basically, there are 4 different classifications: certified, silver, gold, and platinum, that depend on basically how energy efficient and environmentally friendly the design is. We actually have an architect here on campus that's the head of the architecture program, Kevin Singh, who is a certified LEED architect. And there are many campuses and businesses across the country that are choosing to make their buildings LEED certified. When I was at Emory University, which is where I did my undergraduate degree in Atlanta, Georgia, the whole university actually chose to have all new buildings be LEED certified. And they didn't do it because they wanted to be sustainable or environmentally friendly. They did it because in the long run it was going to be cheaper. That's how they got on board with this. And basically the amount of energy savings that they have over the life of the building pays for the upfront costs. Now, not every university or business is going to be able to do this because there are more upfront costs, but over the long term it does end up being cheaper. So we can save money doing these sorts of things, but sometimes it does cost a little bit more upfront. So what are the LEED credit categories? It has to do with sustainable sites, so they want to make sure there aren't any environmental impacts when they're clearing the area. So when I was at Emory, our new science building, which we eventually moved into while I was there, the construction company got fined if they cut down any trees that weren't planned to be cut down. So if they accidentally hit trees that they weren't supposed to, they were charged because they were trying to get this sustainable site part of the LEED credit categories. There's water efficiency, so having low flow toilets, having gray water systems. That means that they're reusing water, not water from toilets, but waters from like sinks where people have washed their hands. And if you can divert that water to like flush toilets or something like that, you can be much more water efficient, but you need to have a system that's set up to do that. Energy and atmosphere, so you want to not waste energy. Material and resources, make sure all the things used to build the building, including like the flooring and the walls and any part that's installed in the building, use as many recycled things as possible and use natural sustainable materials. Indoor environmental quality is another one. So many buildings, we talked about how indoor air quality can be worse than outdoor air quality. So make sure we're not using glues or things that are going to off-gas volatile organic compounds that are going to be bad for the building occupants. And finally, innovations in operations and regional priority. So that's buildings. Another big part of our energy usage comes from transportation. So 40% of US oil consumption comes from automobiles and light trucks. That's us driving around every day. So some of this is due to city design. So it's often really hard to get around and do what we need to do without a car. We've designed our cities so that you almost have to have a car. I don't know if you've tried to walk places in Ruston, but there aren't always sidewalks, for one. For two, we did not place things close together. So we don't necessarily have housing near areas with stores, And we certainly don't have public transportation. So some of this is behavior or habit. So sometimes we don't have to use a car, but we use one anyway. I don't know if you've ever seen anybody get in their car and drive down their driveway to go get their mail or something like that. Like, that's definitely not necessary, but there may be ways that we can bike or walk, carpool, and not in Ruston, but in other places, use public transportation. And those can really cut down not only on how much energy we're using. We know that gas can be expensive, so it can save people money. But it also cuts down on greenhouse gases and makes a big difference in traffic volumes and air quality in a city. Another thing is that electric is more efficient. So we don't think about this very much, but having a whole bunch of separate engines burning something is much less efficient than having one big engine burn something and then produce electricity that's sent to different cars or other appliances. And so electric in general, even if you use the same fuel, would be more efficient than having every single car have its own small engine compared to what a power plant would have. It also makes it so that when we switch to renewables, that power to power that car is immediately a cleaner source than having gasoline. Whereas we'd all have to switch to electric later when we switch to renewables to get the benefit. So I do want to point out that electric cars have been increasing worldwide, but also in the United States, which you can see in this graph here. This looks at by region. This is just from 2010 to 2020. And there are many more charging stations available, and the ranges on electric cars are getting bigger to make them even more useful to the average person. So I heard from somebody recently that they went on a road trip with an electric car, and there were enough stations, charging stations, that they could fuel up, and they were able to do a longer term road trip in the United States now because of these charging stations. You do have to plan a little bit and make sure you know where the charging stations are and know what your range is and things like that. So it's maybe slightly less convenient than being able to get gas at every gas station. But it does tend to be cheaper, and it's definitely produces less emissions.